Angels of Convergence, Chapter 1, Reckless Abandon. Waves crashed against the golden sand, dumping foam and driftwood to mark the receding tide line. Raphael advanced at a deliberate pace across the shallow stretch of water, pausing only to re-secure his footing when he slipped on an unstable patch of sand. Across the bay, a small rocky outcropping grew into focus, only accessible by foot when the tide was low. Raphael continued, picking up pace as he drew closer, breaking into an open run before jumping and lifting himself bodily onto a rocky outcropping just above head height. The stone beneath him was hard, jagged and rough even after countless years of grinding by the wind and sea below. Overhead, birds wheeled lazily in the currents, thermal plumes clearly abundant on such a warm day as they were scattered throughout the sky. Raphael looked up, avoiding the patch of sky from which the sun blazed blindingly forth, scanning the air for the creatures he was seeking. Above, a flock wheeled closely enough for him to identify, gliding down towards the surface in response to his motion. A pair of piercing eyes locked onto Raphael, evaluating his resemblance to prey before the quadhawk's four wings beat against the air to climb back into a more leisurely position. In terms of wingspan, the birds were about 1.5 meters across. Long talons and hooked beaks marked them as dangerous aerial predators. Raphael had come here to try to relocate the nest established on this outcrop. While the quadhawks themselves presented minimal danger to the nearby colony, assuming children and the infirm were safeguarded according to correct protocols, they often carried parasites, some of which brought immense risk to the health and infrastructure of nearby human settlements. Raph's hometown of Bridesbane had recently suffered an outbreak of bollworm, invasive parasites that undermined the foundation of buildings as readily as they burrowed into human hosts to fulfill their prolific breeding cycle. The hawks appeared to be unaffected by bollworm infestation, picking up the creatures in the larval stage while feeding and dispersing the young across the range of their territory during defecation. Working with the rest of the rangers in training at the Ironbark Academy, Raphael had mapped the known territory range of the quadhawk against the surrounding area's dominant species to identify potential sites for nests. Working as a group, they had swept and ruled out 2 of the most likely locations already. Raph was supposed to have waited for 2 of his colleagues to make contact before heading out here, but the tidal chart showed that if he missed his chance to get out here today, it could be a week or more before conditions allowed them to get back to this spot. Even a boat would prove unreliable, as the strong tidal surges and submerged rocks made navigation of this bay treacherous, even under favorable conditions. He climbed up the rocky surface towards the top of the outcropping, eyes wide for caves or crevices in which the quadhawks might have nested. Moving more cautiously as the handholds became more precarious, he found what he was seeking about 3/4 of the way up, in a shallow recess along the stone's edge. Pale, sea-green eggs, about 20 centimeters tall, clumped together in a bed of salt-bleached driftwood. Mercifully, no young were present, the cries of which would have been certain to draw the attention of the parents circling overhead. Less fortunately, as he climbed, he saw smooth boreholes in the surface of the banded iron rock. Bollworm holes. The thick gloves he was wearing should be enough to protect his hands from stray worms for long enough to deal with, but he knew from unpleasant experience that more bollworms would inevitably follow, drawn to his scent and body heat. Even now, wriggling shapes began to protrude from the ends of the boreholes, waving their bodies around, seeking contact with a living host. Raphael pulled himself up onto a flattened section, carefully checking his body and limbs for any unwanted travelers. So far, so good. He opened his satchel and began to secure the eggs in the appropriately sized niches in the incubator. The next phase of the plan was the tricky part. Raph almost regretted not having his friends around to assist with it before the bitter recollection of why he'd driven himself out here returned. He shook his head, closed the satchel after retrieving the last egg, and began to climb for the summit. He'd fire off a flare to disperse the quadhawks overhead, draw their attention to the eggs he carried, then make for the shore before leaving the eggs a few kilometers north of their current location. Once he'd hit the tree line, evading the quadhawks' aggressively territorial parenting easier prospect. Only a few hundred meters of desperate sprinting presented any real risk, and Raphael judged himself to be in fine shape to make the run. He reached the top and launched the flare he'd prepared skywards. An arcing line of brilliant white-hot incandescence streaked throughout the sky, causing the flocks of birds overhead to squawk and scatter in protest. Raph began his descent, avoiding the boreholes he'd noticed on the way up. It was a few feet above the waterline when a fat, wriggling knot of boreworms dropped down from overhead. Most landed on his shoulders or on the top of his hat and were easily shaken off before they could find purchase. To his horror, though, one had landed directly on his face, and he could feel the rasping, circular teeth beginning to grind their way through the flesh of his cheek. He swore and dropped into the sea, rolling around, attempting to smother any remaining boreworms in the salt water. He stood to his feet, a sharp pain flaring from the foot he'd awkwardly landed on, washed the wound in his cheek with more salt water to clean and disinfect as best as he could under the condition. Overhead, the flock of quadhawks had begun to recover from the shock of the flare and began to gather again, circling to try and spot the source of the disturbance. Raphael gathered his wits about him, then began to run for the shore. Fresh flares of pain along his right leg indicated a real injury, a sprain, or similar. No time to think about that now, as the quadhawks began to dive towards his position. Raph sprinted across the bay, running for the shoreline and the tree cover beyond. He made it about halfway before one of the hawks struck him directly on the back of the head, blurring his vision and causing him to stumble in the wet sand. He regained his footing and began to run again, cursing the slow responsiveness in his left side. He forced his way out of the water before another hawk struck him, this time in the lower back, driving him to his knees. He began crawling along the sand, dragging the satchel behind him. More hawks wheeled in his direction, attention drawn by the rest of the flock. Raph's body was rocked by further impacts, now beginning to tear through his protective clothing and draw blood. His vision began to darken as his consciousness drew faint after repeated blows rained down from overhead. A loud boom shocked him to awakening as he became aware of a second flare burning brightly overhead. The impact stopped as he felt a form over his, protecting his body from further attack. The weight around his neck had lightened as the satchel was taken and carried away from him towards the trees by a moving shape, one he registered as human and female. "Raphael, you dickhead," came a voice from above him, the voice of his friend and classmate, Stephen. "When we heard the news about your mum, we figured you'd probably be out doing something stupid like this. You're supposed to wait for the three of us." "Thanks, Stefan," Raph croaked. "I'm guessing that's Tessa with the eggs." "Yeah, you got it, bud," replied Stephen. "When she gets back, you can apologize to the both of us for being so reckless." "I just had to clear my head, you know," Raphael fired back, the pain evident in his voice. "Yeah, we get it, mate. Still a dickhead thing to do, though, coming out here alone like this." Stefan dragged Raphael clear of the shoreline before checking and dressing any visible injuries to him. "You should have come talk to us first. Then we could have done this together," he chided, before his expression softened. The two sat in silence for about 15 minutes after that, neither sure how to broach the subject. "I'm sorry about your mum," Stefan said, awkwardly, unable to maintain eye contact. "She was a great lady." "Better than you, that's for sure," came a voice from the trees. Raph recognized the sound of Tessa's voice, back from relocating the eggs, hopefully. Raph was impressed, despite everything. He didn't think even he'd be able to make that round trip in the time she'd managed. Raph stood up from the tree he was lying against and squared up. "What do you mean by that?" he asked. "Well, she'd never have been fuck-brained enough to try a stunt like this on her own, for a start." "Alright, sorry I had to drag the both of you out here to rescue me. Is that what you're fishing to hear?" "Close enough," she triumphed. "Are you alright?" "He's fine," chanted Stephen. "Pretty nasty bump to the back of the head, but we've all taken worse during training." "Come on, let's get back to the academy and we can talk about this like the mature people we pretend to be," replied Tessa. "If anyone asks, we came out here together and things ran smoothly. Under the circumstances, I'm even willing to forgo the favour you normally owe me for such a good surface." "Thanks, guys. I mean it. I don't know what would have happened today if I didn't have you two watching my back. Let's go." End. Chapter 1.